Are zoos evil? Are they just bad and exist only to satisfy our curiosity at the sake of the animals' freedom and mental health? Or are they actually useful and important for the conservation of animals? There are people arguing for and against the necessity of zoos, but, as it is the case with most controversial topics, not everything is black or white, but rather a combination between the two. Well, in this video we are going to explore the pros and cons of zoos, and at the end of the video you can share your opinions voting in a poll, and we will also try to come up with solutions. That being said, grab yourself a cup of tea and let's start. Because this is a pretty controversial topic, here is a quick disclaimer. I'm going to try to be as objective as possible, and I will talk about the most important arguments regarding the topic. If you have other arguments both for and against zoos, you can respectfully write them down in the comments below. Also, everybody can make mistakes sometimes. Well, everybody except me. So if you don't agree with one of my statements, feel free to mention them in the comments. That being said, let's have an interesting and useful debate. Because of a disclaimer, I now have immunity from all the criticism, or so I think it works. Now let's begin with pros. One of the biggest arguments to support the necessity of zoos is the fact that zoos have a big role in educating people, and especially children, about wild animals. Not everyone has the opportunity to go to Africa to see lions, and zoos are the ones that bring wild animals closer to people. Also, they help raise awareness in this way, and after seeing the animals for real, visitors might realize why they need to be protected. But it isn't all rainbows and unicorns, because zoos might not have that big of an impact on kids as expected. In many zoos, the number of signs is smaller than the number of species living there. Also, some programs just fail to impact the kids, as the majority of them don't learn as much as they would learn from watching a video about an animal. Also, people can't really learn that much about an animal if it is not living in its natural environment. Still, if education is done right, this argument for the necessity of zoos might be viable. The fact that zoos help the conservation of species seems to be a stronger argument. Zoos can receive donations and work to restore the populations of critically endangered species. There are actually a couple of good examples of zoos preventing animal species from becoming extinct. By 2003, there were only 30 Vancouver Island marmots left in the wild, and after breeding 6 of them in captivity at Toronto Zoo, the population rose to more than 300 individuals, and some of them were released back into the wild. Other examples of species on the verge of extinction that were restored by zoos are black-footed ferrets, red wolves, and California condors. While this argument has strong examples, there is still a caveat. Less than 1% of zoo species are part of any serious conservation effort, and many of them are being inbred. Also, not all conservation programs work that well. Animals released into the wild have a low chance of survival. For example, out of 300 pandas bred in captivity, only 5 were released into the wild, and 2 of them died. While there are some conservation efforts coming from zoos, we need to understand that before anything else, zoos are businesses, and their primary goal remains making money, and we should ask ourselves whether it is worth it keeping 99% of animals captive to restore the 1% of animal species. So these are 2 major pros for zoos, and unfortunately, it seems that the number of cons is higher, and we will go over them. Most of the cages of animals nowadays are very different from classic zoos. People try to imitate the natural environments of animals as much as they can, creating bigger enclosures with natural sounds and introducing elements of their natural habitats. Still, it is impossible to create an environment identical to the one in the wild. The noise in zoos reaches 62 to 72 decibels on average, which is way higher than the average of 27 decibels in rainforests. Also, animals prefer darker places, but how would you be able to see the animals if zoos didn't use bright lights, which make the animals stressed? Predators can't even display natural behaviors like hunting, and when they eat processed meat, they eat it too quickly compared to a carcass. And maybe the biggest problem is the fact that there is not enough space. African elephants live in big groups in the wild and travel a lot, but they don't walk enough in zoo enclosures, and develop different health problems. That is why elephants in zoos live half as long as the ones in the wild. Some people might say, at least animals are safer in zoos than in the wild. To which I respond with, no, they are not. The environment created by humans is not always safe. There was a case at Chicago Zoo when an entire stingray population died because of low oxygen levels in their tank. Visitors might also be a danger for the captive animals. There are a lot of cases in which animals die after eating the trash thrown into their cages by visitors. A hippo choking on a tennis ball, giraffes eating 20 kilograms of plastic, and a polar bear dying after eating a vest are just a few of the many examples. Also, animals living in zoos have serious mental health issues. Elephants may develop tics like moving their head randomly, and polar bears just walk into walls for no reason. In one case, a polar bear was swimming in figures of 8 for 12 hours per day, which is definitely not normal. It is usually the animals that live in very large areas in the wild or in big groups that develop these mental health problems. And what is ironic is that not even humans are safe in zoos. There are many cases of stressed workers injuring or even killing their trainers. There is also the popular case of Harambe, a gorilla that had to be shot after a child fell into its cage and was in great danger. So no, zoos are not actually safe, and this is a great drawback. Many times zoos kill surplus animals. A surplus animal is an animal that has made its genetic contribution and is not essential for future scientific studies. In other words, it is an animal that zoos no longer need. Infamous for killing a lot of surplus animals is the Copenhagen Zoo from Denmark. In 2014, Marius, a healthy male giraffe, was shot and then dissected in front of the public. That zoo also killed 4 lions when they wanted to introduce a young male lion, saying that the lions would most probably fight between themselves. Many people don't actually know about this practice of killing healthy animals when they are no longer needed, but it is unfortunately true. Having been to a zoo from a highly developed country, you might not imagine that the situation is way worse in other parts of the world. But let's talk about the zoos from Indonesia. Most of the zoos from that country have very poor conditions, and it can't be otherwise when the cost to visit them is only $2. The most infamous one is Bandung Zoo. The sun bears living there are starving and look nothing like they would look in the wild. You can see them begging for food and eating junk food thrown by visitors and tree bark. And if that wasn't enough, their enclosure floods every time when it rains. There are no possible benefits of such a zoo, and what is sadder is the fact that Indonesia is not the only country with such poor conditions. Before going to the final conclusion, consider subscribing to From Animals if you enjoyed this video, and maybe Spike will be happier. Now it is time to decide, are zoos evil? You can vote in the poll in the top right corner and leave your opinion in the comments down below. What do I think? Well, it is complicated. On one side, there are the zoos that have sufficient funds and try to educate people and help with conservation programs. While the goal is good by itself, the execution might not be the best. So what exactly can we do about the cons of zoos? If we were to close all the zoos, most animals wouldn't be able to go back into the wild. They would most probably have to live the rest of their life in sanctuaries, but at least no other wild animals would have to live in captivity. But maybe there is a better solution in which zoos don't have to be closed, and we should try to find it. If you have any ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe. And if you really enjoy my videos, consider supporting me on Patreon to add your name to that list. Respect animals.